Russian athletes are unlikely to stand, experts say. On their face, the sanctions against Russian athletes for doping look tough. In addition to disqualification of their results from Sochi, each of the more than 24 cases an International Olympic Committee panel has decided so far have resulted in a lifetime ban from the Games. Effectively, it's meant to keep those individuals from coming back in any capacity. Practically, it's unlikely to stand, experts say. The sanction goes against 2 previous cases before the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and the IOC lost another case before Rio that relied on those prior decisions. If they want to disqualify somebody from the Olympics in which they tested positive, that's totally in conformity with the WADA code, said Howard Jacobs, a sports lawyer who represents athletes around the world. But then to say you can never come back, I don't see that surviving if anyone challenges it unless it's written in the World Anti-Doping Code. Already, 22 Russian athletes have appealed their sanctions for being part of the country's institutionalized doping system. CAS is expected to make decisions before the opening of the Pyeongchang Olympics on February 9. More, IOC encourages North Koreans to compete in Pyeongchang more. USOC blames miscommunication for conflicting White House statements on Pyeongchang more. 22 Russian athletes appeal to CAS over sanctions. The CAS hearing panels will consider the underlying anti-doping rule violations found in each case. But it could also accept that finding and the disqualification of results while overturning the lifetime ban. Even if it should do the latter, the Russian athletes are unlikely to compete in Pyeongchang as their international federations are tasked with bringing anti-doping cases against them that could result in periods of ineligibility. In the recent decisions that have been released by the Oswald Commission, the IOC unit chaired by Dennis Oswald that has been investigating and hearing cases, the panel tried to address the anticipated challenge. In a 2011 case, the U.S. Olympic Committee challenged the IOC's Osaka rule, which attempted to bar athletes from competing in the subsequent Olympics after serving a serious doping ban. CAS ruled it invalid on the basis that it was a sanction beyond what's outlined in the World Anti-Doping Code. A year later, it ruled on a similar case in which the World Anti-Doping Agency challenged a British Olympic Association rule that attempted to bar any athlete who had ever served the doping ban from being selected to an Olympic team. CAS similarly ruled that was a sanction. As in the Osaka case, it did not accept the reasoning that it was a question of eligibility. In choosing to sign on to the code, BOA had given up some of its autonomy, CAS said. I think the British Olympic Association case is the instructive analogy here because what came out of that is the notion that we have a WADA code, we have a regime for sanctioning for doping and there can be nothing outside of that, said Dion Collar, director of the Center for Sport and the Law at the University of Baltimore. That's the contact we've made with athletes. In both cases, the CAS panel noted the IOC or the BOA could push other signatories to change the World Anti-Doping Code. Following the release of a WADA-commissioned investigation led by Richard McLaren in July 2016, one which found widespread and state-sponsored doping in Russia, the IOC determined international federations should determine the eligibility of athletes for the Rio Olympics based on a set of criteria. CAS struck down the requirement to exclude athletes on the basis of a previous doping sanction, ruling it unenforceable based on its prior arbitration of decisions. While CAS is not bound by precedent in the way the U.S. legal system is, it does try to have consistency across decisions where possible. Like the BOA case, the Oswald Commission of decisions will come down to a question of the IOC's own rules, said Paul Green, a sports lawyer who handles anti-doping matters around the world. The commission cited its anti-doping rules from Sochi that it may declare an athlete temporarily or permanently ineligible for any games after. To Green, the IOC's argument that the ban is an eligibility question rather than sanction isn't sufficient. It's the same thing in that there's still a nexus between the sanction and doping. That's where it's coming from, said Green. And the IOC is a signatory to the code and there's a sanctioning mechanism that's been allowed under Article 10 of the code, and this isn't allowed. Added Jacobs, it's still a sanction. They can call it whatever they want, but it is a sanction. Collar agreed, saying while the IOC's best argument is that it has authority over the Olympic Games, the reasoning for the bans is likely to be rejected by CAS. The IOC could face a similar challenge to criteria it set last week to exclude athletes with the previous doping sanction from those who could compete as neutral Olympic athletes from Russia and Pyeongchang while the country is banned. Legally speaking, this decision is a different one. Here, we decide whom we want to invite, said IOC President Thomas Bach. This is not about an exclusion or about a sanction. This is about the discretion the IOC has with regard to the invitation of clean athletes. Before that decision, Koller said the lifetime bans of the Russian athletes were unlikely to survive. Should CAS issue another ruling like it did in the BOA case, Koller expects similar reaction from the IOC. The statement coming out of the IOC were, "We tried. We tried for lifetime bans and this is really unfortunate that they don't want to be as aggressive as us," Koller said. "What I see is the latest play is in the exact same game, which is the IOC wants to look tough on doping. I think they expect that these sanctions are also going to get the same CAS review, and then we're going to get the same statement that WADA and CAS don't want to be tough on doping."